For millions of riders, a Royal Enfield represents a specific kind of escape. The brand has built an entire culture around high-altitude adventure and the quiet isolation of the Himalayas. The appeal relies heavily on a distinct sensory experience. Riders are drawn to the heavy, vintage aesthetic and the iconic, rhythmic thump of the single-cylinder engine idling on a dirt road. That design language traces its roots all the way back to Britain. In its early manufacturing era, the company operated under the motto, "Made like a gun," forging a reputation for raw, mechanical simplicity. When the original UK operation eventually collapsed, the machine itself survived. The Indian Armed Forces adopted the motorcycles as rugged military tools for patrolling rough terrain, keeping the production lines moving across the globe. This unlikely survival arc built a powerful aura around the brand. Decades of military service in punishing environments created an illusion of absolute invincibility, an illusion that successfully masked severe underlying engineering flaws. By the early 2000s, that aura was wearing thin. The bikes were becoming practically unrideable, plagued by excessive vibrations, constant oil leaks, and an engineering platform that had fallen decades behind the rest of the automotive industry. This bar chart visualizes the severe production-to-sales gap that was bleeding the company dry. The factory had the capacity to build 6,000 units a month, but consumer demand had flatlined. They were struggling to sell just 2,000. Reviving the operation appeared impossible based on historical precedent. 3 different ownership groups, the UK owners, the Madras Motors, and finally Eicher, had all tried to fix the brand, and all had failed. The corporate leadership had seen enough. Facing heavy financial losses, the Eicher board prepared to pull the plug and shut down Royal Enfield production forever. By the year 2000, Royal Enfield had reached a dead end. The brand's identity was as strong as ever, but the machines themselves had simply become too unreliable to survive another decade of modern competition. Right as the final decision was being drafted, a 26-year-old executive named Siddhartha Lal stepped in. He went to the Eicher board and pleaded for one last chance to save the brand from extinction. He was facing a massive corporate dilemma. Lal needed to figure out how to completely modernize a 100-year-old icon without stripping away the vintage soul that made people want to buy it in the first place. His initial strategy was clinical. Eicher was heavily distracted, operating over a dozen different unrelated side businesses. Lal ruthlessly cut them away, funneling all of the corporation's resources directly into the motorcycles. With capital finally available, he handed his design team a strict mandate. They were to leave the external, classic visual identity of the motorcycles exactly as it was. Saving a legacy brand often requires a counterintuitive approach. You have to preserve the emotional shell that consumers recognize, while being willing to completely destroy and replace the internal mechanics. The turnaround started with an aggressive engineering overhaul. The outdated, unreliable internals were entirely re-engineered, replacing leaky mechanisms with refined, smooth-running engine blocks. To bridge the massive gap between 1950s styling and modern highway performance, Royal Enfield recruited global automotive designers capable of marrying classic aesthetics with modern tolerances. They also abandoned their archaic assembly methods. The company implemented robotic, modern manufacturing processes to permanently eradicate the quality control issues that had plagued the brand for decades. This overhaul produced an entirely new lineup of motorcycles. Models like the Himalayan, the Interceptor, and the Meteor proved the transformation was actually working. For the first time in recent history, Royal Enfield possessed the engineering quality to directly compete with modern, faster alternatives on the global market. True innovation in a heritage market must be invisible to the eye. The vintage look remains, but the modernization is entirely felt by the user the moment they hit the highway. Following the overhaul, Royal Enfield saw a 36 times exponential growth, climbing to nearly 1 million sales in a single year. And this growth isn't limited to India. They are now outselling foreign legacy brands in their own backyards across Europe and North America. Royal Enfield achieved this growth by pivoting its primary market objective. They moved the brand out of the low-margin utilitarian commuter segment. The new strategy positioned the bikes as reliable, customizable platforms for leisure riding, prioritizing the experience of the trip over the necessity of the commute. Because the mechanics are now sound, the physical imperfections a bike picks up on the road, a dent from a mountain pass or a scratch from a trail, no longer feel like failure. They connect the modern writer directly to a century-old story of exploration. True heritage is not about stubbornly refusing to change. A brand's soul can only survive into the future if the company is willing to evolve the engineering that carries it there.